They thought he was just another black man to push around, so they threw him in cuffs at a rest stop. The next day, they walked into court and saw him sitting on the bench, in a robe, with the gavel in his hand. What happened next? No one was ready for it. It started with a coffee. The sun was just beginning to dip below the tree line as Judge Malcolm Reese, 65, pulled into a quiet highway rest stop. He'd been on the road for hours, returning from a civil rights conference where he'd spoken about the long arc of justice and how far America still had to go. Ironically, he had no idea that within the next few minutes, he'd become living proof of his own speech. Dressed casually in jeans, a gray hoodie, and well-worn sneakers, Judge Reese looked like any other traveler. No robe, no bench, no courtroom to separate him from the assumptions people make at first glance. His silver beard was neatly trimmed, and his posture carried dignity, but he blended in just fine. That was the point. He stepped out of his car, stretched his back, and strolled over to a vending machine. The evening air was cool, the parking lot mostly empty. He popped the top off a cup of coffee and took a long sip, staring out at the trees. Peaceful, quiet, until the silence was shattered by the crunch of tires on gravel. 2 patrol cars rolled in fast, lights off but aggressive in posture. Doors swung open, and 3 officers stepped out, all white, all young. Their expressions told a story Reese had seen 1,000 times in court, entitlement dressed as authority. "Hey," one of them shouted, "what are you doing out here?" Reese turned, coffee still in hand. "I'm just stretching my legs. Grabbing a drink," he said calmly. "You match a description," another officer added. "Mind stepping over here?" "What description?" Reese asked. His voice wasn't combative, just curious, controlled. But they didn't answer. They didn't ask for ID. They didn't explain. One grabbed his arm. "Sir, we need you to turn around. Hands behind your back." "I haven't done anything wrong," Reese said, voice still even. "Refusing to comply," the officer said, tightening his grip. And just like that, the coffee hit the pavement. Hot liquid splashed across his shoes as 2 officers pushed him forward and pinned him against the hood of his car. Metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. He didn't resist. He didn't shout, because he'd seen this before. He just never thought he'd be the one wearing the cuffs. The 3rd officer rifled through his wallet, casually flipping past credit cards, until his eyes locked on a gold badge tucked inside a leather case. Judge Malcolm Reese, United States District Court. Silence. All 3 froze. One stepped back. Another quickly removed the cuffs. Their faces drained of color. "Oh, sorry about that, sir. You just matched a report." Reese straightened his hoodie and looked each one of them in the eye. No ID check. No questions. Just assumptions. The officer stammered. "We didn't mean." "I know exactly what you meant," Reese interrupted, brushing off his sleeves. "And we'll deal with this properly." He got into his car, turned the key, and drove off without another word. But what they didn't know was this. He wasn't done with them yet. The sun rose over the courthouse with quiet dignity, but inside courtroom 6B, a storm was already brewing, and no one knew it yet. Judge Malcolm Reese entered through the side door, as he had for over 2 decades. His polished black robe flowed behind him like a curtain of command. In one hand, he carried the case file. In the other, the same calm resolve that had defined his entire legal career. His glasses sat low on his nose, and his expression was unreadable, controlled, focused. He approached the bench, settled in his chair, and glanced down at the docket. And there they were, the same 3 officers from the rest stop. Names he now recognized. Names he would never forget. But Reese didn't blink. He didn't clench his jaw. He simply reviewed the charges: misconduct, use of excessive force, racial profiling. It wasn't about what had happened to him. That wasn't even in the file. The complaint had been filed months earlier by another black man, someone who hadn't had a badge to shield him. As the bailiff called the case number, the courtroom doors opened. The 3 officers entered, dressed sharply in dark suits instead of uniforms. They moved like men used to control, but now they were on the other side of it. They carried a confidence that faded the second they looked up. There, high above them on the bench, sat the man they had handcuffed just hours earlier. Judge Malcolm Reese. The color drained from their faces. One officer stiffened. Another looked at the floor. The third, who had twisted Reese's arm the night before, gulped audibly, his hands twitching at his sides. You could feel it in the room. The shift, the reversal. They had mistaken a man of stature for someone without power. But now they saw it plainly. He didn't need a badge on his chest to carry authority. He wore it in how he carried himself. But Judge Reese? He didn't smirk. He didn't lean forward with satisfaction. He didn't even pause. He tapped the gavel lightly and said, "Court is now in session. Let's proceed." Not a hint of vengeance. Not even a change in tone. Because this wasn't about payback. It was about process. It was about truth. And Reese knew the most powerful thing he could do wasn't to punish them out of spite, but to show them exactly what real justice looks like. He listened. He asked measured questions. He let the prosecutor present the evidence. Body cam footage, civilian complaints, pattern analysis. It wasn't personal, it was policy. Every move he made was deliberate, professional, focused on the facts. The courtroom, once brimming with whispered curiosity, had gone silent, everyone sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a reckoning. Judge Reese could have let anger speak. Instead, he let the law speak louder. And that silence, the stunned, humbled silence of those who'd once mocked him, was more powerful than any outburst could have ever been. By mid-morning, courtroom 6B was standing room only. News had spread like wildfire. A federal judge presiding over a case involving the very officers who had wrongly arrested him the night before. It sounded like a movie script, but it was all too real. Law students, journalists, legal clerks, and curious citizens had crammed into the wooden pews. Some came for the drama. Others came to witness justice. Everyone came to see what Judge Malcolm Reese would do. And the officers? They sat at the defense table, no longer in control. No weapons. No badges. No authority to hide behind. Their suits couldn't cover the anxiety on their faces. One clenched his fists tightly. Another stared straight ahead, jaw locked. The third, visibly sweating, fidgeted with his tie, avoiding eye contact at all costs. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but reporters scribbled furiously, every pen stroke echoing the tension in the air. But amidst it all, Judge Reese remained unshaken. He leaned forward in his chair, robe draped across his lap, glasses resting at the tip of his nose, and began the hearing with the same calm tone he had used for years. It didn't matter that the world was watching. He didn't adjust his delivery for an audience. He listened intently to every witness. He examined every piece of submitted evidence. He cross-checked statements with body cam footage, incident reports, and prior complaints. He gave the defense time to speak. He allowed no interruptions. And through it all, he never let his personal experience cloud his professional duty. But when the final testimony concluded, Judge Reese removed his glasses, folded his hands on the bench, and looked directly at the three officers. The room fell completely silent. No whispers, no pens, no movement, just the deep, respectful hush that precedes something unforgettable. "Yesterday," he said slowly, "you thought I was just another black man at a rest stop. One of many. Someone easy to dismiss, easy to control, easy to throw in cuffs without question." His words were even, but their impact hit like thunder. "Today you sit in my courtroom, and I hold the gavel." He let that settle for a beat, just long enough for them, and the entire courtroom, to feel the weight of it. "But this isn't about revenge," he continued. "This is about perspective." He leaned back slightly. "This court does not run on emotion. It does not run on personal pride. And it certainly doesn't run on bias. It runs on law. And law, when followed properly, protects everyone, including those you failed to protect." One officer looked like he wanted to sink into his seat. Another's lips tightened, holding back tears. "I don't want your apology," Reese added. "I want your understanding. Because someday, if you wear that uniform again, someone's life will depend on whether you act with judgment or assumption." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shame them. He taught them. Because for Judge Reese, dignity wasn't a weakness. It was the most powerful form of justice. The courtroom buzzed as the Internal Affairs report was brought forward. It was thick, hundreds of pages deep, and every word carried weight. Judge Reese reviewed it with quiet focus. The file read like a slow-burning indictment, not just of a moment, but of a pattern, a culture, a system. There were dozens of complaints tied to the same 3 officers: illegal searches, unwarranted stops, intimidation, profiling. Some incidents were recent, others buried and dismissed, until now. Several of the victims had been young men of color. None of them had the power to fight back, until one of those victims turned out to be a federal judge. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as the prosecution played clips from bodycam footage, flashlights blinding drivers, aggressive tones without cause, vague reasons for traffic stops. One video even captured one of the officers joking, "You know how it is. Better safe than sorry." But the real turning point? The rest stop footage. Grainy, but clear enough to see it all. Judge Reese being approached, grabbed, and cuffed with no provocation. No resistance. No reason. Just an assumption. And it was that footage, the one moment they couldn't explain away, that sealed their fate. But Judge Reese didn't gloat. He didn't look for applause. When the final video ended, he took a long pause, removed his glasses, and addressed the courtroom with a tone that was firm, but almost gentle. "There's no joy in this moment," he said. "Only disappointment." He looked directly at the 3 men who had once tried to strip him of dignity. "You were entrusted with power, but you treated it like permission. You made assumptions where you should have shown care. You enforced law, but forgot to apply justice." He tapped his gavel once, soft, deliberate. "This court recommends your immediate suspension, pending final termination review. In addition, I am referring this case to the Federal Civil Rights Division for further prosecution." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. But the real shock wasn't the verdict, it was what he said next. "You don't serve the law by disrespecting those it's meant to protect," Reese said, his voice strong but composed. "You don't uphold justice with ego. You uphold it by recognizing the humanity in every person, whether they wear a hoodie or a badge." The room went still. Even the officers, faces pale, hands shaking, nodded silently. In that moment, they weren't being yelled at. They were being confronted by something far heavier, the truth. Reese didn't need to shame them. His words were enough, because what they had failed to understand at that rest stop, they now understood here. Real authority doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be righteous. And as the court adjourned, everyone knew they had just witnessed something rare. Not just justice, but a lesson in what justice is supposed to look like. News of what happened in courtroom 6B didn't just stay within courthouse walls. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Social media erupted with headlines like, "Federal judge arrested at rest stop, presides over officers' hearing the next day. Justice served, calmly and brilliantly." The judge who chose dignity over revenge, clips from courtroom sketches, quotes from witnesses, and excerpts of Judge Reese's words flooded timelines, news outlets, and legal blogs. TikTok creators stitched together reenactments. Twitter threads broke down the case. YouTube was already flooded with commentary from lawyers, scholars, and everyday citizens praising how the judge handled it. But what caught people's attention wasn't just the twist, that the man wrongfully cuffed became the one holding the gavel. What made this story unforgettable was how Judge Reese responded. He didn't rant. He didn't seek vengeance. He didn't let ego drive justice. He sat high on the bench and showed the world what real power looks like. Calm, precise, respectful, and absolutely firm. One user on social media posted, "The most powerful moment wasn't the punishment. It was the restraint. That's what justice is supposed to be." A prominent civil rights attorney tweeted, "Judge Reese reminded us all, justice isn't about who yells the loudest. It's about who stands tallest when the world is watching." And the world was watching. Law schools began using the case as a modern example of judicial ethics, emotional intelligence, and dignity in the face of discrimination. Churches and community leaders spoke about the importance of patience and wisdom. Even police reform advocates cited Judge Reese's handling of the case as a masterclass in accountability without hatred. But for Reese, none of this was about fame or recognition. He didn't do interviews. He didn't make speeches afterward. When a reporter approached him outside the courthouse and asked, "What made you stay so composed after what they did to you?" he simply said, "Because I didn't want to become them." And that was it. No press conference. No need for applause. Because the loudest thing in that courtroom wasn't a gavel. It was the silence that followed truth. A silence so thick, so undeniable, that it echoed louder than 100 shouts. A silence that carried a message not just for those 3 officers, but for everyone watching. Never judge a person by their skin. Never assume their worth by how they're dressed, where they are, or what you think you see. Because the very person you disrespect today might be the one standing over your case tomorrow. Not with bitterness, not with vengeance, but with something far stronger, grace, backed by justice. And that's what made Judge Malcolm Reese not just a man in a robe, but a symbol of what the law is meant to be.